All right, we are going to go ahead and get rolling. Okay, so just a couple of quick housekeeping things here. We got a lot of content to cover today. There's so much to this topic. I will have a recording of this webinar, so for any of you guys that are in our Elite BSC Mastermind group, you guys will get a copy of this. Everything will go out to the members, and I can get you the slides. And I also have some source material that I've been working from, some different research papers and things that were done over the last couple of years that give a lot of insights into this, and I can share those, or I will share those with our group as well. So that'll be available for all of you guys. So if we miss out or don't get a question answered, or you want more info on this data, you'll get a chance to get all of that. Okay, so real quick, so we've got an HR workshop coming up towards the end of April, and if you go to elitebsc.com, you can see information about that. This is going to be session number 2 in that workshop. So my session at the workshop will be a little bit different than this, but this will just give you a bit of a flavor of the kind of thing we'll be talking about. So this is really a synopsis of the market and how to respond to it. And the workshop will basically be an in-depth discussion about handling the recruiting and retention issue from start to finish in terms of the life cycle of an employee at our company. So you can check out more info about that. We have quite a few seats left for the in-person portion of that, and then there's also a live stream option as well, and you can check out both of those there. So for some of you guys that that may not know me, I know all of our group members do, and there's a few on the call today that are not group members. So my name is Jordan Tong. I am a 3rd generation owner of France Building Services. We are a company that, as of last year, doing about $19 million in revenue and 600 plus employees. And I'm the CEO of the company and one of the owners, and have been doing coaching and consulting in the janitorial industry for about 5 years. And our mastermind group has about 160 people in it. And so just so you know who the speaker is, and this is something I'm swimming in every day, and our team is swimming in every day, and questions and challenges that we're trying to figure out ourselves. So I'm not coming to you as an expert in the labor field or whatever, but someone who's a business owner in the industry. And that's sort of the vantage point that I have, and have a really vested interest in trying to figure this stuff out, because we're struggling just like a lot of other companies are, and we're looking for solutions to ease some of that pressure that we're feeling. Okay, so here's sort of where we're going today in the webinar. So we're going to look at the current state of the market. So we're going to look at some things that are going on right now in our economy, and in particular labor, and then even more particular than that, the blue collar labor in the economy right now. So a lot of labor statistics you're going to see, and unemployment and things are focused just generally on the economy as a whole. But as you guys know, we're dealing with a certain segment of the workforce. And so information about that segment, about the blue collar segment of the workforce, is really more relevant to us in the situations that we're facing. So we're going to look at some of that, like what's going on right now. And then we're going to look at what's causing that. So like, what are the reasons behind that? What are the underlying circumstances or conditions that have given rise to the way the labor market is right now? And then in light of those two things, we're going to look at some responses, hopefully some evidential-based responses, to help us figure out what we should do to go forward to help improve the situation, so that we can have better outcomes in terms of recruiting and retention. So that's sort of the way we're going to go. So there'll be a lot on point number 1 and 2, and then we'll camp out on the last point at the very end. And I just have one slide for that. We're going to go through several different types of responses. And I'll do my best to cover as much ground as possible, but again, the workshop is going to cover all those things over the course of a day and a half. So we'll do our best to do that portion in 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, so real quickly, one of the concerns that I have in doing this is a question that comes up even in my own mind, is we've had discussions even at our own company, and we'll have like strategy sessions, and we're trying to figure out, what do we do about this? We're having difficulty getting applications in, and we're having a hard time finding workers. We're relaxing our standards, and I mean, we would just kill for more people. I'd love to have 10 applicants for every job posting, and I've got 1, maybe 2. And so all of us are looking for silver bullet fixes. And while I think our desire to find a fix is right, it's my belief that unless we go back and understand the problem that we have and why that problem is there, it's really hard to craft a solution. So it's sort of like, okay, I'm having this major like pain issue going on in my head, and I just want some Advil to fix it, right? But the pain and the issue doesn't go away. The Advil might put a Band-Aid over the issue, but unless you get down underlying and look at what's going on inside your head, it's hard to come up with the right solution or the right treatment plan unless you have the right diagnosis. And so what we're trying to do is figure out what the diagnosis is as it pertains to blue collar labor, so we can understand it, and then we can craft solutions based on that. And I'm calling these evidence-based solutions. So as we go out, because I don't want to just throw things at a wall and figure out what sticks. So we don't have enough time and money and hours and resources to be able to just sling a bunch of stuff and hope something works. What we need, because you guys know change is really hard. So if I'm going to implement something new or start a new initiative, like I got to know that it's going to work or have a high likelihood that it's going to have some real impact in my organization. And so what we want to do is raise the odds on that by understanding the diagnosis, so that we can craft some solutions that are hopefully actually going to work in our organization. And we can, with more confidence, implement certain things and hopefully see some success in those. So that's why I think it's going to be important for us to dive into some of these details about the labor market, so that we can look at solutions that I think are actually going to work. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of ground here on section 1. So we got 3 sections in this. And we're going to look at the current state of the labor market. And I have here janitorial labor market. So we're going to look broadly, and then we're going to drill down on some more specifics here in terms of blue collar. So you guys need to know, like, there's so much data here. And so I've tried to sift through and pull some of the more relevant things to the table here. So let's just look real quickly at this particular graph here. This is the national unemployment rates by year. And as you can see, 2007 was a particular low point, and I've got some other graphs that contrast what's going on now to 2007. So 2007 was one of our healthier years in terms of employment and the economy, and then we began to have some struggles a bit after that point. But you can see, starting in about 2010, the unemployment rate started to drop, and it was dropping really pretty daggum consistently year over year over year. Now, 2020, we have a bit of a spike. Like, it's a super temporary spike that was caused by COVID. So it sort of shut down the economy. Businesses laid off a lot of people. So there was a short window in there that created a sharp increase in the unemployment. But as of now, that is sinking back down, and it has sunk down to lows that we haven't seen in a long time. All right. So that's where we stand in terms of unemployment. And what that just means is there's a squeeze that's happening. So there's fewer and fewer people actively looking for jobs that don't have jobs. So the job market, the pool of qualified or eligible or people actually looking for work, sometimes what's called the labor force participation rate. So people that are out there participating, looking for work, that number is dropping and dropping and dropping. Okay, so in terms of blue collar work, so let's look at this here, because this actually, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but so this is unemployment rates for blue collar and manual service workers compared to other workers out there. So like management, professional, sales, office, that sort of thing. So you can see that the blue, the gray, and the black line are more of your blue collar trades. So what we're looking at in this graph is the difference in, if you look on the left side, the difference in current unemployment rate and the 2007 average. So you're looking at that previous high point of, or low point in unemployment in 2007, and we're contrasting what's happening now to that unemployment rate in 2007. And so you can see that even on the national chart, we were dipped below that. You can see that as it pertains to blue collar workers, we're dipping even further below that. So there's a pretty significant difference going down. So, and there's some reasons for this that we're going to look into here in a bit, why that's the case. But the squeeze that we're feeling is, it's more so felt at the lower end in terms of wages, that group of people, than it is on the higher end. Okay, so a couple other stats that are related to this. So there's a record number of job openings right now. It's about 7 million. And these are, again, I can give you guys a source material so you can see where some of this data is coming from. There's 70% of businesses are reporting talent shortages, and this is coming from a study that Manpower did over the last couple of years. And all the studies that I looked at, and these are coming from like manufacturers associations and other places, are that blue collar companies are hit harder on this stuff. So for instance, in terms of profit being affected because of labor shortages, 37% of blue collar companies, so companies that are like ours or in manufacturing or places like that, are reporting hits to their profit margins, whereas only 9% of white collar companies are dealing with that. 29% of blue collar firms have turned down work over the last year, according to a conference board study, and that's one of the papers that I'll send to you guys. So you can see the squeeze is happening more in industries like ours, and so consequently it's having more effects on companies like ours, because that's where the labor squeeze is happening the hardest. So here's an interesting chart here that talks about how companies are affected. So mostly blue collar, mostly white collar. So you can see that blue collar companies are having to do, and they're the blue lines here. Second line down, more employee overtime. The morale is significantly lower in blue collar companies because of this. So a big one here, increased employee attrition. So losing employees, it's hitting blue collar companies more. Decreased candidate conversion rates. So people not accepting jobs or not showing up, which is something I know that we all have happened to us. So that's affecting blue collar companies more. I mean, at like 50% more than white collar firms. Candidates not even showing up for interviews. Adverse impact on the bottom line, lower output, turning down business. So you can see that again, the point that I'm wanting to make with all this is that it is significant nationally, but it's also hitting firms like ours harder than it's hitting other companies. Okay, so I'm getting all the bad news out on the table at the beginning, and then what we're going to do is we want a nice reality check, so that then we can put our thinking hats on to try to craft some solutions to help with that. So here's the last chart, I believe, on this section, and then this, I think, intuitively makes sense here. So the black line here is the unemployment rate, and the column on the left, the vertical column on the left, is the percent of unemployment rate that it's tracking with. And so you can see it's, you know, up and down. 2000, right around 2000 or 2001, it hit a pretty decent low, and then again in 2007, and then you can see now it's dipping down lower than it has over the past, 3 decades or more. Now the other two lines, the blue one in particular, is your average hourly earnings for production and non-supervisory work, and this is measured in wage growth as a percent. I think it's a 3-month moving average, so quarterly average. And you can see that what happens, there's typically an inverse relationship between the unemployment rate and the wage growth, and that's what we're seeing. So if you look at like 2015 to 2019, what you're seeing is the unemployment rate is dropping, and there's a corresponding increase in the wages. So not only is there fewer and fewer candidates, but it's also costing us more money to get those fewer and fewer candidates. And that makes sense, right? Like that's sort of the pressure that we would see. And at some point we would like to see that even out. We could call this a supply demand curve of sorts. So, okay, that's a lot of charts here. So let's look at, that's sort of the bad news. All right, so let's try to dig a little bit deeper and maybe understand why these things are happening. and then maybe where there is some exposure here that we can tap into, or some maybe untapped areas of the labor market that we can identify and then go after or attack. Okay, so let's look at sort of behind the scenes, maybe what's causing some of this stuff. Okay, so the first one is the boomer issue. So on average over the last several years, boomers have been leaving the workforce at a rate of about 2 million per year. Okay, and in 2020 this number was about 3 million. And so what's happening in particular COVID, the boomers have been leaving the workforce at a greater and greater pace, and many of them, particularly because of COVID, it was sort of this final push. They are finally sort of hanging up the hat, as it were, and that number is getting greater and greater. And you can see this on this chart. I mean, 2020 seems to stand out pretty significantly in terms of contrasting with the other years, and that only has increased. I don't have more recent data in this chart here, but since COVID. So COVID was the final push there. And one of the things that's driving that, obviously there's the age factor that's going on there, but then also boomers have a really high net worth. I mean, so they're the richest generation. And I don't know if it's on the next, no, it's not on the next slide. So I forget what the total wealth that they have. I mean, it's in the trillions of dollars as you look at the boomers as a whole. And so the idea of retiring is right there for the taking for a lot of them. And again, COVID was something that just was like, yeah, let's go ahead and do this, because that age group is more susceptible to COVID or negative effects of it. And so, and you're going to see some graphs here in a minute, but as this group is leaving, it's a massive section of the workforce, and we're struggling to replace them. And so that's one of the reasons for this squeeze that we're feeling. So, and the reason that we're struggling to replace them is that we have had pretty significantly low birth rates in the US since about the early 70s. So think about this, and this is, most people don't really think along these lines, but there was a study published by MZ over the last year, and we actually did a podcast on it, that they called it the SANS-demic, which means SANS is without and demic is people. So it's without people. There's an issue happening over the last 50 years in America of low birth rates. So in order to just replace the population that we have, it requires 2.1 births per woman in order for our population to stay steady. And we've been pretty significantly below that since about 1971. So I think we're averaging like 1.7. So when that starts happening, in the 70s and 80s, you don't really feel the effects of that until several decades later, when those workers would actually be getting in the workforce and then also having children themselves. And so as boomers have started to retire, they're starting to retire about the same time that we're starting to feel the effects of this low birth rate. And so this gap is starting to increase more and more. So here's a couple of charts here to sort of highlight maybe what's going on here. So you can see as we're looking at the workforce, so boomers were the largest share of people in the workforce up until about 2014, 2015, somewhere in that that range. And millennials now have just passed them and are sort of on the upswing. But we'll see here in a minute the statistics for millennials. The millennials curve will start to even out, and projections sort of point out to this, but the boomers will start dropping off at a faster rate than the replacement of the other generations. So you can see the Gen X line, the millennials line will sort of look like that. It'll start to taper off like that. So this gives you an idea just visually of what's happening in the workforce. And so we're seeing a shift, and this compounds the nuance of the issue, I guess, that there are the way that millennials act in the workplace and what's required to hire them and keep them is different than that generation previous to them. And so more and more attention is going to have to be spent on figuring that one out. So here's another graph that sort of highlights what's going on. So if you look in 2003, which is the map on the left, this is your total fertility rate or your birth rate. You can see the states that are in the blues are ones that are having children at or above the replacement rate, all right, in 2003. And so kudos to everybody in the Southwest for keeping our population growing and helping us with a healthy economy. And I'm in Kentucky, so shame on us for not keeping that going. But you can see in 2017, it is really like flipped. Like the whole country is now moved in a direction where we're not having kids at a rate to replace the people that are here. And what compounds this problem is we have an aging population that's exiting the workforce, that's going to require care. So this sort of helps in your mind sort of figure out, and again, there's not a lot we can do with this particular one other than have a lot more kids. But that's definitely not a short-term solution for any of us. Okay, so the boomer thing is one piece of it. The low birth rate is another piece of what's going on in the marketplace right now. And the next one, and this one's super interesting, is the prime aged male workforce has begun to drop. So, and I've got some charts here in a minute that I'll show you on this particular one. So in 2020, 2.4 million women left the workforce. So COVID, as you guys well know, sort of put some pressure on us figuring out how to handle our kids in a way than we hadn't before because of, NTI and school and the shutdowns and how COVID affected all of that. And so a lot of women left the workforce because of that, and a lot of them are not returning, have figured out how to live on less or like their new arrangements or whatever. And so that's a little piece of the squeeze there. But so this is where it gets, I guess, difficult for us, and I think this is something we may be able to tap into at some point. But so the 22 to 25-year-old male participation rate, so men who are capable or eligible of working between ages 22 and 25 went from 94% in 1980 to 89% in 2019. So you think, okay, well, that's just 5%, but it's actually a significant number. So if that rate was at 100%, so everybody that could work was actually working, this means that we have 7 million workers sitting on the sidelines that are not working that could be working. All right, so something else that's playing into this is, I mentioned a little bit ago about the boomers are the wealthiest generation from a net worth standpoint, and millennials are expected to inherit this wealth, which will be close to $70 trillion by 2030. So you think about, you now have a generation that's in the workforce a bit less, particularly the men, and they're standing to inherit a decent amount of money, which further lowers that desire to enter the workplace. The opioid epidemic is a piece of this that's happening. And again, we'll maybe talk a little bit about the drug-related stuff here in a bit, because I think there's some more opportunities there for us. And this is also, and all of you old people can amen this and complain about it. For the first time since 1880, more men aged 25 to 34 are living with their parents than with a spouse. So the sons in the basement of their moms is actually a real thing that's happening. And then also statistics have shown that males are increasingly preferring part-time work over full-time work. And we have an issue, I guess, of prime age working men in culture right now. And so this is sort of an issue that's out there that's causing some of the labor problems. And so we just want to tuck this in the back of our mind as we start thinking about how we would craft some solutions to help with some of this. Okay, so here's another chart here. This talks about the labor force participation rate, and this is for age 25 to 54. It's a 12-month average, moving average going on here. So what you can see is over time, particularly from 2007 on down, in the women's, the pink line is measured from the left column, the right column from 73 to 77, and the men's, the blue line, is on the left column, the 88 to 92. But you can see that the labor force participation rate has dropped for the men and is not recovered to a level that was healthy or the way it was before. And so we're losing or not having as many men in the workforce as we should have. So something else that's sort of along the lines here as it relates to not just men, but people that could be in the workforce, but that maybe aren't for various reasons. So this is disability. So most of our workforce is going to be people with high school or maybe even not high school education. So not a high school diploma, not college, maybe a little bit of college. And you can see that for people who are in those demographic brackets, disability rates are much higher in that group. And you guys know this, we employ a lot of people that have various disabilities, and we see those disabilities with people with lower educational backgrounds. And again, let's tuck this one back because it's something we're going to come back to here in a bit as we talk about how we might shift our emphasis in a bit. Okay, this is the participation rate for people age 16 to 24. So we're talking like the people at the very beginning of their working years. And you guys have probably noticed this too, that you probably don't hire a lot of people in this age bracket. Like it's just not something that you do. And I think the same goes for us. And statistically, one of the things I think that's significant is, and you can see sort of the inflection point happens right around 2000, 2001, but more people are going to college now than ever before. And there's a lot of good to that, okay? But it's also creating some other issues like extremely high college costs, people not getting jobs, able to pay off their student loans, whatever. But what's happening is people are not entering into the workforce during those early years and are sort of bypassing that in order to focus just on going to college. And so there's a pretty decent amount of untapped labor right now that's choosing something else, but it is a void there. It's a people group in our society that are not working that could potentially be workers. All right. So again, we'll tuck this one in the back of our mind as well as we think about creating some solutions. But just know, so far what we have as we're thinking about people that are not in the workforce, that are not participating, but that maybe we could get to participate. We have boomers that have retired. There's a large swath of people that are not engaged there that could potentially be engaged. We have a decent segment of the population of men that are not engaged or not engaged in full-time work that we could potentially tap into. We have a disability population that we could tap into. We also have this group of young people in the 16 to 24 age gap that's not participating in the workforce that we could potentially tap into. So we're starting to uncover like these squeezes in labor are coming from different pockets of society for different reasons. All right. And so as we think about crafting some solutions, our aims should probably be, instead of duking it out for that group that's eligible and is looking for work or is already employed, maybe we begin to look on the periphery to some of these groups that are not currently employed and maybe aren't even looking to try to tap into that untapped labor pool that's on the sidelines right now. Okay, so let's think for a minute here. Let me look at my time here. Okay, good deal. So let's think for a minute about where we would go from here. And so now would be a time to start opening up for questions or comments or whatever. And so what I want to do in maybe the remaining 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes, is I would just like to explore some options for how we might proceed forward, or what we would do going forward to help with this. So, and I think there's really two areas of focus that we need to have, and those are going to be recruiting efforts and retention efforts. So if you think for a minute here, in many ways, our need for recruiting is driven by, it is driven by growth, okay? But for most of us, the majority of our recruiting needs are because of retention issues that we have. So if you're at 100% retention, or I'm sorry, 100% turnover rate, and you've got, let's say you have 100 employees, that means you're needing 100 new workers every year. And so if you were able to cut that down to a 50% turnover rate, it would cut the amount of employees in half that you would need to recruit in a given year. So I think for us in our industry where we're already struggling with high turnover, I think the biggest bang for our buck is figuring out how we can keep our people long term. So all the emphasis typically is placed on recruiting, like how do I find applicants? How do I find applicants? Where, what job boards are you using, and what incentives are you doing, and whatever. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But I think the greater emphasis has to be on retention, because I think if we're able to move the needle on retention even 5, 10, 15%, we put ourselves in a much better position going forward. And our recruiting needs become less if our retention is doing better. So I'm curious if any of you guys, if you want to type in the chat or question box, if any of you guys are doing anything to help with retention. But some of the things that I have in mind here, and we're down on point number 2 here, is, so I think, and this one's multifaceted, okay? One of the things that you could do, I think that would be helpful, maybe a good starting point, is I would be doing exit interviews with everybody as much as possible and figuring out why people are leaving. This could be something pretty easy to implement. I mean, you could have somebody at the front office that's, or at your office that's just making phone calls and trying to figure that out. And maybe even offer like a gift card or something like, hey, we just want to tap in and figure out what's going on and why you left. And you're not trying to coerce them into coming back. You just want to know. And then maybe conversely with that is look at all your employees who've stayed with you 9 months or a year or 2 years and interview those people and find out why they're staying with you. So this, again, I'm huge on creating evidence-based solutions here. And so when you're doing interviews like this, so exit interviews or interviews with people that are already on your staff, I think it gives you some really evidentially based insight into what's causing people to leave and what's causing people to stay. And so the more data that you get on why someone would stay or why someone's leaving is going to put you in a better position to figure out how to keep people around. And it'll also, so think about this too. Let's say that you've got someone who's stayed with you for 2 or 3 years, and let's say they're retired. Okay, they worked a long career. Let's say they're in the boomer category, and they've worked a long career, and they're sitting at home, and they wanted something to do. They could have used a little extra money. They like to go on a vacation once or twice a year. And so now you've got like, hey, this job's flexible. It's pretty easy. I like the environment that I'm in, and I enjoy the part-time nature of it, and there's not a lot of stress or pressure. So it's like, okay, here's a kind of person out there. All right, we'll call them our avatar that's out there, that this gig works for someone like this. And so from there, you got some, let's say you have 2 or 3 or 4 of those across your company. Well, then this should make you start thinking about, how do I go after that segment of the population? Like, where are those people? How do I get in touch with those people? How do I relate to those people? What sort of messaging do those people care about? What sort of, what would make someone like that? How could I entice those kinds of people? So that's just one, simple little example, but you can imagine there might be a lot of different groups of people that you could uncover within your company, or maybe even outside, that you could tap into. And once you identify who those people are, then you can figure out a strategy to go get them. So this is very similar to our sales discussion, in that we figure out who are our best customers. What are the things about them that are really good? What's the DNA of those people? And then we make a list of what that criteria is, and then we go find companies that match that criteria. So what I'm saying is, on the recruiting end, and the retention end, we do the exact same thing. We go through the same sort of process. Okay, so somebody, Andy, made a comment. This is really good. So, and this is on the orientation end. So think about retention is something that happens really from day one. So like as soon as they turn in the application, your retention is starting right now. So every touch they have with the company is going to affect whether or not they stay. And so one of the things Andy says here is they created a new hire orientation that shows videos of employees who've been with the company for a while and have moved up in the company, and it shows their career opportunities within our organization. So this is great. This is really powerful. So we have a lot of that too. People that came from backgrounds that they think, man, I don't know that I'll ever be able to have some sort of successful career. And we've got a lot that have moved up in the ranks. So I think that's great. You're sort of sharing stories to help people feel like they're part of something. It's maybe a story that they will be able to have realized in their own life. Okay, so let's look at some other solutions here. One is having more babies. I'm partially kidding, but if we want to fix this solution in the long term, that's something that really from a large scale standpoint needs to be focused on. And some people here talk about immigration, and I do think immigration is important, and I promise I'm not going to get political here. But immigration has actually been something really helpful for us in sort of stemming the tide on this low birth rate that we've had. So immigrants have sort of made up for that over the last 20 or 30 years. But the problem with letting immigration be our ultimate solution is this birth rate thing is happening in a lot of other countries along with the labor shortage. And so, like for instance, in Mexico, one of the studies that I read, like they're dealing with a labor shortage now. And other countries, specifically European countries, are struggling with the birth rate issue. And so at some point that the immigration can't be our ultimate solution. But that being said, I think tapping into an immigrant population, you can see this is number 4 that I've got on here, is a potential for us. So this one does take some work and some effort, because it may mean you need to hire somebody in your company that is an immigrant themselves. It's probably not feasible for us to sponsor workers and get work visas and that sort of thing. I'm not ruling that out. I'd be curious to know if anybody's done that in our industry. I don't know if that makes sense financially for us. But I do know that there's immigrants and refugee populations in so many cities, and those people are all looking for work, and for a lot of them, it's difficult for them to find work because of the language barrier. And so, I mean, just given what's happened in various Middle Eastern countries over the last few years, we've had immigrants from a variety of places, or I mean, refugees that have come in from a variety of places. And so there's again, other pools of workers that are really non-traditional and take some extra effort on our part to figure out how to do it. But somebody's going to get those workers, and those would be very loyal workers by and large. Because often what we're looking for is we need to find people that really want to be doing the kind of thing we're allowing them to do, which means it's an opportunity they feel like they wouldn't have got somewhere else. Or in our boomer example, it's a part-time gig that really fits their lifestyle that would be hard to find somewhere else. So we have to be a bit extra diligent in figuring out where those pockets are that we can tap into. So I mentioned retention, I mentioned immigration. So the next one would be how to tap into the retired boomer market. So I think here again is another place that you've got workers that their retirement was accelerated by COVID, and it's a significant population of people. I mean, you saw, like, we're talking 3 million people a year exiting now across the country, which is a pretty darn good size exodus of workers that are sidelining themselves voluntarily. And if we could craft some solutions to attract that group of people, we might have a recruiting pool at our fingertips that maybe other people can't access. So again, I have no silver bullets to offer you, but I think what I do have is that we can uncover these untapped areas, and you guys are going to have to figure out, how do I actually go get those people? So the boomer market is definitely going to be one. I mentioned the other two markets as well. So you have the disability market, you have, and then you have the younger age workforce. So that 16 to 24, 25-year-old workforce. And there are some companies that are tapping into this pretty well. So an example for me would be Chick-fil-A. So they struggle with turnover too, but not quite like we do. And their stores are full of young people in that 16 to 24 age group, and they figured out a way to do that. And so this is another potential opportunity for us. So my next to last one is flexibility. So as this is something that popped up again in study after study, is that a difference in the millennials and Gen Z, the workforce that's now has the greatest number of people in it in the workplace are those younger generations. And it used to be, and for any of you guys that maybe that are boomers, you know this, it used to be that you had your job and you built your life around your job. And the mindset has shifted quite a bit in that people are like, hey, my life and my family, etc., are important and take priority over my job. My job's important and I want to work, but my work revolves around my family and my life as opposed to the other way around. So you can be okay with that or not okay with that, but that's just sort of the way things are. And so figuring out how to be more flexible, I think is important here. Now, I don't know exactly what that looks like. My brother is currently doing an MBA program and is working on a project on this particular topic, creating flexibility in industries that it's difficult to be flexible in. And we were having a conversation about it. And so I do think we have to be a bit more creative on this end. So there are certain limitations in terms of the flexibility that we can have. But if we want to, particularly that 16 to 25 or 30 age range, if we want to get that group, I think we're going to have to figure out a way to be a bit more flexible and less rigid. And because I don't think, as a general rule, it's that that group doesn't want to work at all. It's just that they may not want to do it on your terms. And so again, we can bellyache about that if we want, but either way, we've got to come up with solutions to figure that out and still serve our customers really well. And that's a challenge before us. Somebody said we need to go to colleges and cafeterias for bingo night. So yes, so hitting up our high schools and colleges and going to the bingo hall may be a place you can find some people. Maybe you can host your own bingo tournaments at your workplace, and maybe that would help you tap into certain portions of that. But you can see where this is going, right? You can see where what we're trying to do here is find, and I've said this about 20 times, this is what I want you to leave with, is there are pockets of people that are not employed, that maybe aren't actively looking, or that traditionally aren't being sought after. And our job is to go after those people and figure out how to get them, okay? And this is going to involve strategies like social media strategies, okay? It's going to involve, how do we tell stories and get in front of people and have messaging and job ads and things that relate to those groups of people. So if it's the 40 and older crowd, it's going to be on Facebook. If it's the 15 to 25 crowd, you're not going to be on Facebook or MySpace. You're going to be on something else. But we've got to figure out where those people are and how to get in front of them and how to message them in such a way that we can attract them to our organizations. So lastly, and I've hit on this just a little bit, is that we want to look for people who were maybe at one point or another considered unemployable. So again, we're constantly looking. We're not going to duke it out over and fight all these other employers over the blue collar workforce. Our margins, I just know for us, are not healthy enough for us to just throw money at this thing and just keep escalating wages. So we have to find something else. And so there's a lot of different groups of people that maybe were not considered employable that we could go after. So I've mentioned the immigrant population or the refugee population. So I think getting our hands dirty there in terms of like just getting down in the weeds and figuring out how to make that thing work, I think is a really good option for us. And I think it could be super rewarding too. I mean, I think there's some mission-oriented stuff there, or philanthropic stuff, that we could tap into, where our companies become more than just places to go serve customers. We're actually serving a people group maybe that's in our community, and that can be really rewarding for us and a blessing for our communities too. So that's one. You guys have probably heard me talk a decent amount about the drug rehab community. So you saw the statistic about the opioid epidemic, and so there's a huge section of the population that has misdemeanor and felony records, and for a lot of employers that cancels you out, like you're not eligible to go there, and that doesn't have to be the case for us. And we've tapped into that group of people pretty significantly, and it's been super rewarding for us. I mean, so we've had some phenomenal people working for us now that come from that group. And what's interesting is once you have somebody, one or two people from this group, particularly in like a management level, then they start to become a bit of a pipeline for other people coming through. That we're one of the places that will hire people with those sort of backgrounds. So you can think about on this end, I mean, people with mental health or other disabilities is another area of people that were kind of unemployable, or employers really didn't want to have to deal with that, that I think we could tap into. You guys could probably come up with a long list of traditionally unemployable groups and think about how we can tap into those. So I'm open to any more questions here. This is sort of wrapping up here, but my takeaway for you, my encouragement for you would be to work on the periphery. So find and identify 2 or 3 or 4 pockets of people, or groups or demographics of people, and focus your efforts there. It's fine to have some general ads and you're pulling from that larger pool that everybody's competing with. But I think if we want to make some significant inroads to helping with our recruiting efforts, we're going to have to work on the margins with some of these other groups. I mean, you guys have seen some of the data and where things are, and the downside is I don't know how much better it's going to get in the near future. And so creative solutions, I think, are important. So major focus on retention would be number one. And then number two, second takeaway would be working on the margins or the periphery to identify these other groups that you can hire. And I think that effort, that two-pronged effort, I think can make up some serious ground for us. And for those of you that are in our mastermind group, I'll obviously continue to share our efforts and how we're doing with that. And we'll keep you guys posted if we're coming up with some solutions that we're finding helpful. So Scott, you mentioned veterans. I think that's another great crowd. And our experiences in the drug rehab community have actually been pretty good. Okay, somebody else Thomas said, we are only anticipating that the base pay is only going to increase. Our quality control and sales efforts are trying to stay ahead of this by revising agreements. Yeah, so we're doing the same thing. So we found that wages have been increasing. And I think that is sort of like we'll call it the table stakes. So you've got to have your wages somewhere in the ballpark of where the other companies that are competing for the same workforce as you. So, restaurants and hotels and retail, you've got to be in the ballpark of those. But I think once we're in the ballpark, I don't think we fight to be the top payer, because I think there are other considerations there. So I think we need to, the law of diminishing returns, I think, applies there. I think you've got to raise your wages to a certain point, but I don't think there's a one-to-one correlation between raising wages and better applicant pools or retention or whatever. So I do think you got to get it somewhere workable, but I think that other options are going to be needed. And yeah, we're having to go to our customers. So actually, we are anticipating a bit of a profit decrease this year in terms of our net profit, because of this issue you're talking about. So we've not been able to, wages have increased faster than our ability to go get price increases from customers. And so we hope to have that resolved by the end of the year, but but it's going to hit us a little bit in this current fiscal year. And you're right, Thomas. Customers are mostly positive because I think they are facing the same issue as us. And all you need to do is tell them, ask them how much they're paying their blue collar workforce. And if they say, yeah, we're offering starting wages at $20 an hour, say, okay, well, we're trying to get people here for $14 an hour. So you can understand the difficulty. So most of them are pretty sensitive to that and reasonable when it comes to that discussion. So hey, listen, if you guys have any follow-up questions or would like more info about the workshop, Jordan at elitebusinesscoaching.net, you guys can email me. Let's see here. Yeah, so, and you can go to elitebsc.com to get information about the workshop. This is the second session that I'll be doing in the workshop. And then all the rest of the sessions we're going to be like a deep dive on how do we do the onboarding process in order to help with retention. How do we go about recruiting with these issues in mind, and how do we do training, and what are recruitment and retention strategies? So we're going to sort of go through the whole gamut of the employee life cycle and talk about how we can improve our retention and decrease turnover and help on the front end in terms of getting good workers. And we'll talk a bit about benefits and wages and attracting high-level people to your organization as well. But that's sort of the direction we're going to go. So any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You guys, obviously, I do a plug for our mastermind group. This place is awesome, and it's mainly because of all the members that are in there, about 160 of you all. I'd encourage you to hop on the message board on Basecamp and start dialoguing about this stuff. I think we could learn a lot from each other. This is an area where I think we can pull our resources and serve one another here. I think if we find things that are working, we can certainly learn from each other on this one. So if you're not a member, check that out. You can go to elitebsc.com, check that out. And I'll be posting copies or recordings of this webinar and the research and stuff that I used with it will all be available to the group, and I'll get that out to you guys in the next few days. So take care, have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon.